All right, so why don't we get started? Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie. I'm the program consultant for the part-time MBA here at HHL, and I'm very excited to see all of you today and to have Michael with us. Michael will take you through the preparation or preparing for the test. Excuse me, let me just let somebody else access. For your information, for those of you who have not heard yet, we will be taping the session and the video will be available afterwards as well. So if you need to go back to any of the information shared, you can always do that. And yeah, I guess we all want to get started. So I will hand over to Michael, who will take you through everything. And then I'll be back at the end to answer any questions that you may have. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to type them into your chat. I will monitor the chat and interrupt Michael wherever necessary, or we'll just let the questions sit there until the end and go through everything then. So yeah, thank you very much. And Michael, it's your turn now.
Thank you. And hello, everybody. It's always a pleasure for me to give these webinars to candidates who are taking the test, because one of my main motivations when we came up with the test in the first place was to make it more straightforward for candidates to apply to business school. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you a little bit of why we have this test in the first place. So the first goal of this test is to be more inclusive, which means that regardless of your background, you're able to demonstrate your talent and your capability to the school to which you are applying. Many of us come from different countries with different language backgrounds and different educational systems. And the previous exams that were more popular, such as the GRE or the GMAT, they were quite American, native English, in their content. And so we wanted to have something where you didn't need that kind of fluency or background. So we created this test to enable ambitious adults anywhere, that's you folks, to access global graduate business education opportunities. So it's kind of your connection to schools worldwide. The next, of course, was we wanted the test to be relevant. Now, many of the tests out there at the moment still use old things like trigonometry or grammar rules to test people, and this is not very relevant when it comes to applying to business school. So we wanted to allow people to show that they understood the language for business school, the mathematics for business school, the logic for business school, and the experience for business school. So traditional tests usually use academic subjects that were unrelated to graduate business education. And you know what that meant? It meant a lot of people had to go back and study it again. And that added months sometimes to their preparation and a lot of stress. So we developed the business admissions test to match the skills developed through the regular life and business experience of a global candidate base. So if you have any experience at all in the workplace, or if you're just like a fresh graduate, you should still be able to use your experience either academically or professionally to help you understand the content and show your ability to think cognitively. Last but not least, this is all very well and good. You know, let's be inclusive, let's be relevant, but is it accurate? And the good news is that this test has shown to have equal, or in many cases, especially with quantitative, better correlation with the course performance compared to the traditional tests like the GMAT or the GRE. And nonetheless, you still don't need to do a whole lot of preparation for this. So this is an example of what they call blue ocean thinking. We can get an improved product at less cost to the customer. In your case, much less cost and time, and in many people's cases, no need to get a personal tutor or preparation materials for it. So that was the basis of the test. Then there's the process, and the process is very important too. So how it works is, when you're applying to a business school, many people take a test first and then apply to a business school. This doesn't really work very well for the school or for the candidate because you lose so much time before you get down to the real application process. And often schools, well, I mean, they make decisions as much based on your profile as anything. So if you express interest in the program and they see your profile and they say that looks pretty good, then all you have to do at this stage is the test. So the school will invite you to take the test, and they do that through your email address. So the school will send an email address to you using the system. You get an email that you use to confirm your email address. You click on a link, and lo and behold, you see sample tests for you to take, and then a link for you to take the test for real when you're ready. Now, when you take the test for real, you won't take it through a browser because we have to assure the school that you are the person taking the test. So what we do is we use a special application that will use your webcam, and that will allow you to take a picture of yourself, a picture of your ID card, and then it will record you throughout the test for you to show that you are the person taking the test at all times. And we also record your desktop screen, basically what is inside the application. And then that shows the school that you have not been using other applications to communicate with people. And then once that's done, the security is taken care of. The school will get your report straight away as soon as you have finished the test, and then the process moves forward. So all of this can happen really quite quickly. The only time you need to think about is how much time you will set aside to prepare and how much time it takes to take the test. So let's recap. You can create your own account just to do some practice tests on the platform. Or if it's for the first time, maybe the school will invite you to the platform using your email address. Either way, at this point, you create your profile, you take some practice tests, you pay for the test when it's time to do it. And if you don't pay for the test, that's okay. You don't need to take it. But once you pay for it, you can take it at any time afterwards. And then finally, you download the application from our website. There's a link there, and you use that to take the test. So it's quite a straightforward process. Now, that's the process. What does the test look like? Well, for you, there will be 4 sections. Some schools also use a case study, but for this program, you don't need to think about that. You will be using the 4 sections of multiple choices, and each section will last 30 minutes. So think about that in your head, right? I've got 4 30-minute blocks to prepare for. Let's go through those 4 blocks. The first one, communication analysis. What's the point of the communication analysis section? I mean, this should be a relevant test, right? You see, when you're in business school, they're going to throw a lot of material at you, and they're going to say, you got to read this, and you've got to understand, and you've got to figure out what's happening. You need to be able to summarize this thing. You need to be able to pick out important points, in this case, for discussion in class. So you need something to be able to analyze communication from another person. By practicing for this, you will develop rapid read summary skills, meaning skills, which implies that you know what's important in the message, and also fact identification. You will train your brain to figure out, among all this text, which text really matters. And for those of you who will go on to things like investment jobs, where you'll be reading legal documents and contracts, this is going to be your bread and butter. So communication analysis trains you, just by taking the practice tests and the test itself, to read and understand complex case materials. So you're not just preparing for a test, you're preparing for business school. That's the first section. Another section is called data interpretation. Now, a manager or an entrepreneur, a person in business, usually gets information in lots of different formats. It's never simple. You get written information, somebody calls you, you look at a graph, You have to get used to seeing information in many formats, figuring out how they're all linked together, and using that information to inform a decision. I will say to you that the key to being a good business person is to improve your decision-making skills. And decision-making skills should be based on understanding what information you have and how to use it. So data interpretation teaches you how to process information in different formats and then come up with a way to model this and get a usable result. Another section for you is called critical thinking. So when we designed the test, we did a focus group of people who had gone through business school. And in fact, I had gone through business school as well. I did an MBA program, but everybody has a different experience. So I said, let's get a group of people from many different business programs and say what matters most to you in class. And the truth is, the most popular thing that people said mattered in class was when people speak, that there's constructive, logical discussion. Not people are just talking to grab airtime. I'm sure you've all been in a meeting where somebody just talks all the time. What you want is somebody who understands what's going on and who can logically progress the conversation. So critical thinking trains you to look at statements and decide, what do you know? What's a fact? What do you not know? What's an assumption? And what's a conclusion? So what do we do with the information we have? What's the logical outcome? This will develop skills for you in business in arbitration, which means judging between opportunities. You know, when you judge two opportunities, you must be very objective. You need to know what the facts are. And you need to know when you're making an assumption, the basis of the risk you're taking. All good business involves a bit of risk because that means it's something new and you don't have all the facts. So as long as you know what's a fact and what's an assumption, you can make better decisions, more informed decisions. And of course, there's one section on how comfortable you are with calculations. You know yourself, you got to get the numbers right. You know, you can do a lot of things very well, but the numbers must add up. This is truly the basis of accounting, of management accounting, of financial accounting. You judge a business, you value a business, you judge performance based on whether you are making correct calculations. So data analysis builds the skill in you to do rapid, while you're in the middle of something, reliable. You know you've got the right answer, numerical assessments. So these are 4 sections of questions, but actually consider them as 4 ways to train yourself. Now, let's go through those sections in more detail. Communication analysis, okay? You're going to develop abilities. Those abilities include being able to read, absorb, and understand the communication using 3 key tools, okay? The first tool is figuring out what the main idea is. Effectively, what the passage is emphasizing as the essential truth. When you read this and you've finished it, what do you take away? It's a bit more than just the summary. It's the thing that the author wants you to believe. Okay, so what's the main idea behind it? Another tool you use is inference. To infer means that on the basis of something, what can I then logically say happens next? So an inference is an understanding based on a logical progression. So you're not told it explicitly, you have to figure it out implicitly. And of course, fact-finding. You need to be able to find quickly within a passage something that can support an argument or something that demonstrates something. You know, you can't just talk about it in general terms, you must get to specifics. So this teaches you to work with specifics. So the main idea, imagine it visually as this, okay? It's something that's like the main summary at the top of the article.
Reading comprehension.
I think we can hear Praveen there. Can you mute yourself, Praveen? There we go. Inferences on the basis of a statement, what does that imply? So, when somebody is writing something down, it's not just a question of taking it for granted. You have to see what this person is implying by what they say. And last but not least, when you need to drill down to details, find those explicit facts that help you, and if necessary, show where information is missing. The result of all of this will give you a well understood piece of content where at different levels, at a summary level, at a logical level, and at a data level, you can analyze and communicate its impact to others. As a manager, as a business leader, you are expected to represent, and that can be representing communications, reading and understanding. Communication analysis is not just a very good tool for assessing people for business school, it's a great skill to develop for you later. Critical thinking. Well, we practice this in order to develop abilities too. The first one is this person making logical sense? So we identify in our heads what the components of an argument are. When you argue with somebody, you think of people who are trying to best the other. I shout louder than you, or I speak longer. That's not a reason to win. We have to think about a sound argument on the basis of its logic, of the reliance of the information in it. So we need to understand when something is strongly argued, that means there's a lot of information to back it up and the logic makes sense. When it's strengthened or weakened, or if it contradicts itself. You will find this very useful in dealing with people in interactive situations in business, in meetings or in sales or in law. As long as you understand where the facts lie and where you're making assumptions, then you can become a very strong person in arguing. So what are the three basics in critical thinking? The first basic would be a fact. What does it mean to have a fact? Well, something that everybody can accept as a reliable piece of information. An assumption. Well, what you mean by I assume whenever you say something. It means you say, I don't know for sure, but I guess this is the case. An assumption is like a missing fact when you're piecing together an argument. If the fact is missing, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but you have to be clear that you don't know it for sure. So you can't rely on a missing fact. You can only propose it and as an assumption. And a conclusion is, well, something you can proceed with on the basis of your prior facts and logic. As I said earlier, being a manager, being an entrepreneur is about being a decision maker. As long as you know what you know, and what you don't know, and what your rationale is, then you can make a decision. People pay you to make decisions. When you're a leader, when you're a manager, your job is to decide constantly. So, facts, I like to represent everything visually where possible. And I think this will help you when you're making notes during the exam to represent these things visually. So when you know a fact for sure, you kind of write it down like as a box. When you say, I'm missing a fact, then you kind of represent that, say, with broken lines and say, it's part of the argument, but I don't know it for sure. And then you've got a conclusion. And the idea is that the summation of the facts and the assumptions should lead to the conclusion. In some cases, we are given partial information. And we have to decide, from the point of view of efficiency, do we have to use all this information to get a result? Or can we use just some? And this teaches you efficient thinking. So we have kinds of questions that give you two pieces of partial information, and we ask you, what is the most efficient way to arrive at a solution here? And the most efficient way, we'll see what that means in a second, is using the minimum amount of information possible. We also look at strengthening and weakening arguments, which is, you know that you're missing some facts, okay, but you still need to come up with a conclusion. And then somebody provides a new piece of information to you. And then you decide new information improves the strength of your conclusion or if it weakens the strength of your conclusion. Again, a very important skill in interactive business situations where people are proposing different ideas. Very important in meetings, very important in contract negotiation. So what you do is you look at a new piece of information as to whether it strengthens your understanding of what's going on or actually it weakens it. Last, we will also look at, there are also questions in this test where you're given a set of rules, and on the basis of those rules, you decide what the outcome is going to be. This is very good for logical thinking and allows you to kind of create rules around, say, product design. Again, legal contracts, process frameworks. So you learn how to set up situations with a lot of rules, and then you can manage that complexity well. So the result of all of this is that you will develop the abilities to argue clearly and to construct a good deal. Remember, a good deal isn't just good for you, it must be acceptable by another person. So your argument must be strong, it must be based on the facts, so you know when to say no to somebody. And it'll teach you how to be confident in taking a position. Data interpretation is one of the 4 sections again, and this is more quantitative, but it's still got a logical component. The first part of it is we will be given information in different formats, and we must turn that information in different formats into something we can use. So you might receive an email with information, you could have a spreadsheet with information, you could have some visual information given to you. And on the basis of those different kinds of data, you have to create a model that synthesizes a solution from all of that. So you'll be taking information from different sources to create a single outcome. It's a very powerful skill. You will also, just like in critical thinking, determine whether you have enough data to be able to solve a problem. Very common in business is people move ahead without enough information and they later regret it. This is a form of risk management. When you decide if you have enough information to move forward or if you discover that you do not. What that means is, naturally, we're optimistic. We would like the positive outcome to happen. But as long as we know what information we are missing, we can also consider the downside, as the phrase goes. And then we can see what could happen if things don't go our way. And this is the basis of very sound decision-making and good management practice, that you consider all the possibilities and whether or not they are all positive or indeed are negative. So understanding whether you have enough information to proceed is very, very important. So there will be questions in the test that look like this. You will be given partial information and you'll be asked, can you come up with a solution? You will be given different rules to apply to data, and on the basis of that, you will see if you can solve the problem as well. You will get information in many formats, some of it tabular, some of it graphical, some of it written. And the result of practicing for the data interpretation section is you'll become a great analyst. You know, an analyst for, say, a financial services company gets information from the markets, they get information from regulatory authorities, they perform calculations, and then they produce a report. That's what data interpretation is all about. You will get the skills to process management information in many formats, understand its context, what's important and why, and then make a call back to our decision-making on whether a solution may be found, and if so, what is the means to find it? What is the solution path? So in a way, you're practicing for after business school, by practicing for this test too. Now, the last section of the test, you'll all be very tired at the end of it, I'm sure, but it's the one where your brain does need to be working very smoothly, because this is where you come up with a number and you kind of bet on this number. You've done your calculation and you must come up with a result, and that is the result. So this is a test here of your ability to perform and to check calculations you make so that you can do smooth, on-the-fly, dynamic processing of information. So you're in a meeting and somebody says, well, for the first $500,000, there's no tax applied, but for the second $500,000, there's a 20% tax applied. Immediately in your head, you say, that means 100,000 tax on a total of 1 million of revenue. That's what you're training yourself to do with data analysis. You see the numbers, you visualize what's happening, you perform calculations, you understand the impact, and you move on. So you learn how to line up data so that a picture of the problem emerges and a rapid solution. And rapid meaning you've practiced this thing before, you've developed this kind of calculation skill. So examples could be, you're given a profit and a price. What's the base cost here? What's the fraction of the cost of the total price? How much discount can I offer this person and still make a 20% margin? This is the kind of skill that you develop by practicing data analysis. That's what I mean by dynamic processing of information. When you negotiate, you need to be in control of the numbers all the time. You may also develop skills whereby you're given intersecting pieces of information and you figure out what the picture of all that information looks like, and from there, how to solve it. So these skills give you confident numerical skills, rapid decision-making skills that are suited to consulting, finance, and business development. In consulting, I guess that makes sense, right? Consultants are hired to be accurate. In finance, you're hired to be reliable. And in business development, you're hired to be rapid in making decisions at any given time so as to arrive at a good deal, because deals quite often disappear after the opportunity comes. So you need to be able to process the numbers dynamically as you're there. So this is, if you like, the motivation statement for the test, and it also helps you to prepare mentally for those 4 sections. You've got the read and understand section, you've got the critical thinking section where you think about logical arguments, you've got data interpretation, which is about information in a lot of formats, how do I tie it together? And you've got data analysis, which is training myself to be like a mathematical athlete. I'm able to move and think quickly and be very confident. So now we move on to the experience of the test. You're going to go through this experience and you've got a nice simple interface. That's the good news. So when you log on at home and you take the test, I presume on a laptop, you can only take this on like a computer. So it'll be like a Macintosh or a Windows laptop, or you could use a desktop computer at home as well. You can use a phone and you can't use an iPad because they don't allow the webcam to be used and the screen to be captured so that you can prove that you're taking the test. So you're sitting in front of a laptop and you see this interface here. I would say the first most important thing you should look at is the timer on the top right. There are 30 minutes for each of the 4 sections. And if you like, these are the resources you have to complete this section. Your only resource is time. So keep an eye on your resources always. There are 15 questions, there are 30 minutes. So on average, you should go through a question in about 2 minutes. If you discover some questions are very straightforward, don't relax. Get it done quickly, finish it, and give yourself more time for a difficult or an unfamiliar question that can happen later. What you will see at the top is the list of all the questions. And the good news is, if you feel bogged down in one question, you don't have to answer right away. You can actually skip forward and back throughout the test as you wish. You are not forced to progress in a straight line. This is just like the real world. When you have information in front of you, you can decide which one to prioritize. So you will also develop prioritization skills in this that you cannot develop through an adaptive test. There are 5 answers at the bottom, and you obviously there's only 1 is correct and 4 are not correct. And the scoring goes as the amount of questions you get correct. If you do not answer a question, there is 0 contribution. If you answer a question incorrectly, there is 0 contribution. But if you answer correctly, it adds to your score. You're not punished for getting the answer incorrect. You're already under enough stress. So what you can do is, you can at least, if you're down to 2 questions and you're not sure which one, at least you have the option to just pick one. And you don't worry that by picking the wrong one, it will negatively impact you. It won't. Do your best is what the message here says. Now, the questions at bottom, all you do is you select one. If you decide to change your mind, you can just select another one, and it immediately stores your answer on the cloud. You can go back and forth among the questions, and if you decide I want to go back and check one and change that answer, you can. It's only when the timer finishes a half an hour that you can no longer go back. So think about priority. Which questions do I want to answer first? You can do a quick skim through if you like. If something looks easy, you need to develop that level of confidence that you can finish it quickly and move on. You also need to remember which ones you're not sure of, so you can go back and check later, and you can make notes as you do so. So that's what the interface looks like. When you finish a section, you move forward. So here are a few key aspects of the test. First of all, the test is not adaptive, okay? It doesn't get harder or easier based on how you answer questions. It allows you to go back and to check your answers and to do your best, just like, as I say, in real life. We all have that opportunity in real life. So there's no score inflation over time because people don't prepare a lot for this test. And it's up to the school to decide if they want to give them the result of the test, in fact, because the school is considering not only your test score, but your background, whether you add diversity to the class, whether you add important experience to the class, and what your potential future after the course may be. So with the other tests, when you get the score back straight away, quite often people say, look, I want to do that again, get a better score. I'm sure it will improve my chances. But one of the principles of this test here is you do your best and you will be considered on the merits of your whole application. So don't stress out too much over it. Just do your best on the day. Next, the content. We do our best to make sure that you don't need to be fluent in the language of the test. Now, in your case, the language of the test will be English because it is an English program. Other schools around the world actually have this test in other languages, such as Spanish or French or Chinese, for example. However, you don't need to be fluent in it. There won't be any tricky words. It will be the kind of English you will use in business. And I will also say that the logical and analytical skills that you've developed at work or in life will support you in the test. You shouldn't feel like you have to do a lot of preparation and pay somebody to train you. Which leads me on to the last part, which is we give you a couple of sample tests, which will give you familiarity with the test structure. Very importantly, the experience, because beyond understanding the content, you need to train yourself mentally and emotionally for these 2 hours of pressure. So doing the practice tests in your own environment will be to do this. You will also become familiar with the question styles and the type of content. And you should not have to pay for an external tutor to help you. If you do, of course, you may. but it isn't one of those tests where there's a big preparation business required for it. So now, I suggest, and we'll do some sample questions in a moment, I suggest that your main form of preparation is to do the practice tests. You can create your own account straight away for free, or if the school invites you, it will create an account through that process, and you will see straight away you get a couple of practice tests for you to do. And you can repeat them as many times as you like, just to get familiar with the environment and the content. And this will take away a lot of the stress and the burden of the unknown, and it will develop confidence in you. And it will develop time management skills, and it will develop prioritization skills, all of which are in addition to the problem-solving skills that you need to develop as well, which will then serve you in the business program afterwards. You have to think too about your physical preparation for the test. Don't be tired beforehand. Make sure you have enough sleep, you've eaten earlier, you're relaxed, you're hydrated, because all of this can impact your mental performance on the day too. When you are practicing for the test, just doing the practice tests, take a break first after doing one section. So load yourself with section 1, then pause and take a break. Same with section 2, 3, and 4. Then repeat it, and then say do 2 sections at a time, and then repeat it and do the whole lot together. And you build up that level of stamina. So when it comes to the test on the day, you're confident and motivated. So let's do some sample questions from each section to help give you a flavor of what you can see. The first one here is a kind of a historical, strategic, political passage, okay? So this is the kind of logic that you may come across in doing maybe corporate governance or that kind of units in a business program. But it also demonstrates the different skills you need in reading through a passage of text. Now, I will just summarize it here. Okay, so I'll briefly go through it. Later, if you like, you can watch the video because it's being recorded and pause and go through it in your own time. And then practice on the questions yourself. Then go sign up for the practice tests and do it. And then, of course, do the real test. So there are 3 paragraphs. That's the first thing I see as a test taker. And so I'll begin to mentally compartmentalize those 3 paragraphs. The first one clearly is a form of introduction. Here's the basis of what's going on. So the first part, it describes a situation where when Malaya was occupied by the Japanese, there was a resistance formed called the Malayan Communist Party. But then after World War II, they stuck around and they still didn't agree with the rule of the British after 1945 either. And so the government had to make a decision. What do we do? So what they did was, they did, if you like, an analysis of what's going on. They realized that the people whom they wanted to eradicate, the Communist Party insurgents, they had a source of supplies taken from the poor villagers. Now, the poor villagers themselves, they had a mix of motivations. Some of them supported the communists, some of them supported the British, but in general, these people were fundamental to the survival of the communists by giving them the supplies. And so then, on the basis of these facts, a person formulated a plan with a conclusion that became the basis of how they deal with this. And so what they did was they created new villages, and these new villages had better amenities for everybody. So in a sense, they got rid of the old support system for the guerrillas, and they created a new support system to generate goodwill for the government and to cut off the guerrillas from their source of supplies. And then the passage tells us that this was indeed a success. Now, I'm restating the content here, if you notice. what I've done before all of this is I read through it and I explained it back to myself in my own words. This is key to communication analysis. Read it and summarize it in your own words and in much less words. This will teach you what's important, what are the key facts, what are the points of inference, and what's the main idea. If you can explain it back to yourself in less words, you're developing that skill. And use that skill every time you read a passage. It's like, when you read a book, you read through it sequentially. But when you read a report, you should summarize it and parse it in your own language, in your own words. Then you can use it afterwards. So let's look at a sample question. Here's a typical question. It says, according to the passage, that thing we just looked at, all of the following are true, except. These are kind of tricky because when you're in a hurry, you might just see true, and you see something that's true, and you select it and you move on. It's a typical question that's there to make you really check your answer before you move forward. Do I really understand the question? So what's true from this passage here? It says that the plan was to improve the quality of life for those living outside of the big cities. Well, indeed, it does say something here, right? It had two aims: to provide a better standard of living for rural Chinese Malayans. Notice that there's a bit of restatement in different words. Here it says outside of urban areas. Here it says living in rural areas. The same thing. So it's kind of disguising, if you like, the thing using a different set of words that mean the same thing. So you'll become more aware and more alert of this through this. So, okay, this is true, but we're looking for the ones that are not. So the answer is not. It was an important part of the British response. Well, I remember a word from this, and it said the cornerstone of the British strategy. So you know what that means? It means cornerstone is, it was a very important part. So this is also true. Great. I can forget about this answer. It attempted to prevent the Malayan Chinese Communist Party from gaining access to supplies. Absolutely. Because again, we go back to the aims, and it says to cut them off from their source of supplies. It looks easy now when I'm explaining it back, but when you're in a hurry, this can be very stressful. So develop the ability here. It says relocated only those who did not have legal title to their land. Now remember something about relocation, because they created these new villages and they were relocated. So then we look more clearly at it, and it says only those who didn't have legal title. But it doesn't say that. It just says 400 Chinese were forcibly relocated, 400,000 were forcibly relocated into their new villages. So that looks like they just moved everyone, whether you had legal title to your land or not. So a lot of people are pretty unhappy. This looks like this is the right answer. But wait a while, let's see what the last one says. The last one says, is it true it eventually achieved its military objectives? Well, I can see at the bottom of this, from a military standpoint, it was a resounding success. This is true. So of all of the five, the one that looks like it's not true is definitely D, so I select D. So you can see that it is a process of shortlisting answers and then deciding between shortlisted ones. Here's another one. The passage implies, so this is inference, okay? It implies that, let's go through it. Some of them were reluctant to hand over food or money. So in order to test this, I'll go to the part where this is mentioned. And here we go. The insurgents depended on supplies taken voluntarily or otherwise, which means not voluntarily. So that means that indeed, it looks like some Chinese villages were indeed reluctant because they didn't all give it voluntarily. So I'll shortlist it. Here it says the majority of Chinese villages were strong supporters. Well, what it does say is few villagers were communists. I mean, that definitely doesn't support the idea that they were majority supporters. So I would say probably not. Then we go to the next one. The majority of them were strong supporters of the British colonial government. Well, just because you're not a communist doesn't mean, as it says here, you can have grievances against the Malayan government, which is the British colonial government. So we don't know whether a majority supported the British either. In a sense, they were just caught between the two. So I don't think so. The next one, it says the majority of them had already been granted full citizenship. Well, here's the thing. Where does it mention citizenship? Well, it mentions citizenship based on the rewards that you get by helping out with the British. So it says here, the government had failed a pledge to provide an easier path to full Malayan citizenship for the ethnic Chinese. So it doesn't look like the ethnic Chinese already had their full citizenship. It looks like the government had broken the promise. So I doubt this is true. Then it says none of them willingly assisted the guerrillas. Well, actually, we know that's not true because it did say that some of the supplies were voluntary and some of the villagers were communists. So this is definitely not true. So we remember that the first one seemed like the most true one, and none of the rest look very true, so we pick that. So that's why I said you got to go through all of them and shortlist them, and only at the end go back through your options and see which one is the most likely. So here are two good examples of communication analysis questions. The first one is we're looking for like facts from the passage, and the next one is inference. So like I say, which one looks like it's the most true based on what's written here? What does it imply? Let's move on to a sample question from critical thinking. Now, critical thinking usually gives you a statement and a conclusion, and you're asked to decide, is this a reasonable conclusion to draw? Remember what I said? You've got to develop these skills to know if you're making a good decision. So let's read through it anyway. And as with all of these text passages, try to explain it to yourself in your own simple language. That way you don't get distracted and you focus on what matters. So let's read it. It's nice and short. According to a survey conducted by the Office of Career Services, most MBA students plan to work for an investment bank immediately after graduation. So I would summarize this first line as the first bit is all waffle, to be honest. The only thing that matters is it says most students plan to work for an investment bank immediately after graduation. I'll make a note of that. They all plan to work for Goldman Sachs. Then there's a conclusion. And the conclusion says, therefore, it is not true that most graduates work for a management consulting firm right after graduation. So the summary of that is it says, therefore, most graduates don't work for management consulting companies. So we write those two things down. Most people plan to work for a bank. Does that mean most people don't work in consulting? I bet you there's something missing there. So the reasoning here is flawed, it says, because it fails to do what? Well, before we kind of go into that, let's, write down what it's trying to tell us. So the first thing is it gives us a fact, okay? And the first fact is it says most students plan to work in an investment bank. So I'll write that down. It then comes up with a conclusion. And that conclusion says that most graduates don't work for consulting firms. Can you draw a straight line between saying I want to work for a bank versus a year later, nobody's working in consulting? Well, that'll only be true if their plans work out, right? They all want to work for a bank. A year later, have their plans worked out? So the assumption here, right, the missing part in the middle is that their plans always work out. So if your plans always work out, then of course most of you would be working for a bank and not for a consulting firm. But that's the if. So identifying the if is key to good critical thinking. It doesn't mean it's not true. It just means you can't take it for granted. And if you can't take it for granted, you have to consider all the other possibilities. So like I said earlier, you're a manager. You want the upside, but if it's not guaranteed, you have to consider the downside. And then you manage your risk appropriately after that. So here's the assumption. And the reasoning is flawed because you can't go straight from fact to conclusion. It's missing this assumption here, which is that your plans always work. So let's go through what the options here are. The first one says the reasoning doesn't consider the long-term career objectives. That's actually irrelevant. I mean, it doesn't consider the long-term career objectives, but that's not anything to do with what happens straight after graduation. Because remember, it says the conclusion is that you don't work for a management consulting firm immediately after graduation. So therefore, you may say A is irrelevant. You're in a meeting and somebody says something, you go, that's nothing to do with what we're talking about. Not every contribution is helpful. So you need to develop that skill, identifying what's relevant. Next, the argument, it says, fails to explain why many students prefer to work in an investment bank. It's true that it doesn't explain why they prefer to work, but it's not connected to what actually happens afterwards. Because what the conclusion says is that they don't work for a consulting firm, but it's not connected to what their motivations are, just their plans. So I don't think this is relevant either. It says it fails to distinguish between intentions and career outcomes. Now that looks suspiciously similar to our simply stated assumption here. So by comparing the fact and the conclusion, we kind of wrote in what we think is the assumption here in our own language. It'll never be exactly as what's written in the answer options, but they should look like the same sort of thing. So C looks very like what my link assumption is, so I shortlist that one. The reasoning is flawed because it fails to evaluate the career plans of undergraduate business students. No, I mean, it's very clear what the career plans are. They all want to work for a bank. Now, whether that works out or not is another thing entirely, but we know what those plans are. It says it fails to mention other career paths available to students. Well, the point here is we're saying that just because you want to work for a bank doesn't necessarily mean that you won't work for a consulting firm, because if your plans worked out, you would all work for it. It's not even, it doesn't need to mention what the other career paths are. So of all of these, I would say the strongest one is the one in the middle here, C. So you can see how these logical text-based questions work, okay? It's never as precise as a numerical answer. It's about zeroing in on meaning. Why is meaning important? Meaning is how people communicate to each other and trust each other. So developing a strong understanding of meaning is very important. And these kinds of questions are very good for you this way. Okay, you can do lots of sample questions like this in the practice test. Now, there's a special kind of question that you may have seen before if you've done tests like this before, but it's the one where you're given partial information, 2 sets of partial information, and you are asked to decide what's the most efficient way of using this information. Now, of course, if you use all the information you're given, more than likely you'll have enough information. But that's not what this question is testing. It's testing if you know the difference between having enough information and having all the information. So let's go through what I mean by that. You usually start off with 2 facts, okay? And I'll just draw them here in boxes. I've put down fact statement 1 and fact statement 2. We assume that these are facts. It's like the survey earlier, okay? And then we get a question. And the point of the question is, do I have enough facts here to be able to answer the question? And you need to know, well, how much data do I need to use to answer the question? Because it could be that there's enough information, but I need to be clear about how much information maximum I need to use. So the first opportunity, this takes time for you to get your head around, but once you do, it's so easy. But it'll take you a bit of practice. The first answer is yes, the first statement gives me enough information, but the second answer doesn't give me enough information. So the second fact doesn't give me enough information. So you know the difference between the two of them. The first one gives me enough. I can take that and use it. The second one doesn't give me enough. I'll ignore it. The opposite is true for B, where the first statement wouldn't give you enough information, apologies, and the second statement would. That's different to when neither of them on their own give you enough information, but when you combine the two, they do. And you need to combine the two. Understood? Because you see, you could combine A and 1 and 2 here, and will give you enough information because 1 alone will give you enough information. It's the need to combine the two that you need to identify. Can you see how that's different? The fourth answer is always the same one that says, yep, the first one gives me enough and the second one gives me enough, independently of each other, which is very different to the second, to option C here, right? Option C says only when combined. D says either one. And the last one, you can imagine it says, well, I've tried everything and I still don't have enough. There's only one negative outcome from all of these here. The rest of them, think about it, combining statements 1 and 2 will always give you enough information because there's enough information either individually or combined. So that means you've got to be very careful about when you lump them all together and when you treat them separately. This gives you excellent skills in identifying the value of resources and being efficient in your thinking. So to summarize here, statement 1 is enough. You realize that you can forget about trying to evaluate B, C, or E, right? So if you discover that statement 1 is enough, that means you only need to consider A and D. If statement 2 is enough, then your options are either B or D. If neither of them are enough, then your options are either C or E. And then you combine the two and you see if that will. So let's do an example here. Let's do an example from, say, critical thinking. And in critical thinking, we're given a piece of information here which says, at a certain university, it gives special consideration to legacy applicants, who are usually relatives, okay, of somebody who's already been in the university. Notice how I'm restating it in my own words so I understand. Because of this special consideration, that means that legacy applicants get a higher acceptance rate than for non-legacy. So try to picture it in your head. I got a friend whose brother went to this university before, so she's more likely to get in than I am because I don't know anybody. So you're beginning to kind of picture this in your head somehow. So now we've got a clear picture of what's going on, right? You got your legacy people and they got a high acceptance rate versus the ones who don't get in. And you got your non-legacy people like me, right? And because we don't have any connections, we're not as likely to get in. So I draw a simple picture of what that looks like, just so I can understand and then make comparisons later. It's very hard to make comparisons just using text. Using pictures is so much more efficient. So now we got a question. I've got a a pair of statements here. The first one says that, you know, I've got special consideration, I got a higher acceptance rate. Now my question says, does that mean this year that the university will reject a larger percentage of legacy than in the past? Basically, the question says this year, based on the information I'm going to give you, do we have more rejections from legacy? That means kind of a smaller fraction of legacy people admitted. That's how you explain it to yourself before you progress onto the supporting data. Now let's progress to the supporting data. The first one says that this year, the acceptance rate for non-legacy, these people, was higher than at any time in the past. That means the fraction of candidates from non-legacy backgrounds was higher. The school is more generous to non-legacy people. So the first thing that I see here is like the rate, the fraction. Rate is one thing, absolute numbers are another. So I have to ask myself the question, is it possible that actually this year almost nobody applied for non-legacy? So even though I admitted all of them, it barely made a dent in the legacy. In fact, you could still have more legacy people admitted because very few non-legacy appeared. See, we don't know either way. And if there's doubt, we don't have enough information. So your job here is to manufacture doubt. If it guarantees you an outcome, you have sufficient information. If you can creatively manufacture doubt, then you know you don't have enough information. And a way to do that is to consider different scenarios. So I say statement one is not enough because it doesn't guarantee that there will be a lower rate of legacy people admitted because of the possibility, the doubt, that there could be ultimately very few non-legacy people at all applying this year. Maybe there's thousands, maybe there's only a few, but we don't. Statement one is not enough. So A is not enough, so we can discount, we can discount A and we can discount D straight away. So our options now become B, C, or E. At least we know we're down to 3 options, so our chances improve. Next statement, and try to forget you saw the first one. This is the hardest part of this question. You've read statement one, you have to block it from your mind as if you never saw it before in your life. That's so hard to do. You have to disconnect it from your memory. Let's look at statement two on its own. And it says, because of a rise in the total number of legacy applications, these folks, the total absolute number, there's more and more applying this year, it rejected more legacy applicants this year at any time in the past. So then we say, okay, we've had more people applying from legacy and they have rejected more people, actual people. Does that mean it's rejecting a larger percentage of them? I say, no guarantee. It could have rejected 100 more people this year, but it could have, because so many people were admitted, it could still have a higher acceptance rate. So by manufacturing that possibility, I realize I don't have enough information. I also noticed that if it only rose a small number of people this year and rejected a hell of a lot more legacy people, yes, that would reduce the acceptance rate. So I've created 2 possible outcomes, both of which are possible. So therefore, I can't be sure which one. I've got a doubt. I can't accept that's enough information. So now B is not enough on its own. So I can discount A, I can discount B, I can discount D. So now I'm left with the last 2 options, C and E, which are the ones where we have to combine both pieces of information. You don't have to combine them if one of them on its own is already enough. But because neither of them are, we have to combine. So let's combine them. By combining them, we see that the acceptance rate for the non-legacy people is higher, and they're rejecting more legacy people than ever before. However, until we know the total numbers from either side, we still don't know if that gives a lower acceptance rate for legacy or not. there could be, like I say, a very small number of people applied for legacy this year and a huge amount of people from non-legacy, which would definitely mean I've got a lot less legacy people coming in. But at the same time, you could have the other situation. So this is a good example of where you're manufacturing scenarios to test what your hypothesis is. And because I still have two scenarios, each one could be valid and they're contradictory, I still don't have enough information. So that says even combining both pieces of information, I don't have enough information. So our answer choice here would be E. So to restate, we can say for statement one, even though the non-legacy rate could be higher, the absolute legacy numbers could be lower, which could still allow ever more legacy admissions to happen. The second statement says that while you're definitely rejecting more legacy people, like absolutely more, the fact is there could be so many applying this year that the rate could be the same or it could even be greater, and you still don't reduce the number percentage-wise. When you combine the two, having a higher non-legacy rate and more legacy rejections, I can still see two scenarios where they give different outcomes. And when I still don't have a single answer that answers the question definitely, whether yes or no, then I say I don't have enough information. Therefore, I'll have to say the answer option here is E. This is pretty tough, right? But once you get your head around it, can you see how powerful your ability to judge information will be? These are great questions to practice. Now let's go on to something more familiar looking. Okay, a little bit of mathematics. This is data interpretation. You can see I'm giving you information in different formats. All right, so first is a table, quite a complex looking table. It's got years, it's got cars, and within each car, you've got two different numbers again. So really got to wrap your head around this before you proceed. Try and summarize in your own words what this table is telling you. I always say it's all unknown the first time I look at it, but just by going over it a few times, I make it known to myself. You build familiarity with the unfamiliar. So let's look at this table and say, well, what's going on? I see I've got 5 years, I've got 4 cars, and for each car, I've got 2 parameters. Okay, so then I'm beginning to understand what's going on. And those parameters are the same for each car. It's fuel and distance. And fuel I can see is, okay, that's liters and distance is kilometers. So then I'm beginning to get it. I say, oh, now I understand. We're looking at how much fuel it took to drive a certain distance for a certain car in a certain year. And now I've got it fully explained to myself. So I then look at the other graph and it says it gives the fuel efficiency, which is the distance traveled per liter of fuel consumed for car D. Now we could just maybe extrapolate these ourselves from there, but here it's giving it to us visually. And there's a good reason for this. I'll show you why. So now we've got all this information before we even look at the question. We just try and explain it to ourselves first, what's going on. Now I know what's going on, I look at the question. First question says, what's the average fuel efficiency of car D over these 5 years? And it gives us 5 answers. You can see they all look pretty similar. Now, this looks straightforward. However, it contains a trap which many of you may be familiar with. It's asking for the average fuel efficiency over the 5 years for a certain car. Now, some of you might say, oh gosh, I know, I've got 5 numbers here, I'll just get the average of them. There's the trap, okay? You don't get average efficiency by getting the average of the efficiencies. The average efficiency is measured over a full interval, so you get the full consumption over the full distance traveled versus the average of the individual efficiencies. So if you kind of quickly added these up and divided by 5, that would give you the wrong answer. What you've got to do is you got to add up all the distances and gives one number. You add up all the fuels, gives you another number, and then you divide that full distance by that full fuel consumption, and that will give you the average over the full interval. So the reason why this is a bit of a trap is because one of these options here is if you did the incorrect path. And you go, oh yes, I got it, I'm so right. There's the answer, right? But that's there to trap you, and when you get it wrong in your practice, it's to teach you something, and that is check your rationale, check your answers. Not everything that looks like the right answer is the right answer. Check it again. So go back over your logic and say, have I missed anything? And if you develop that sense of completion, in your thinking, then this will serve you very well to be a good decision maker in business later. In some ways, it's the people who survive in business are the ones who get wealthy. And the people who survive are the ones who avoid mistakes. And that's true in politics, it's true in business. How do you avoid mistakes? Check, look before you leap, check, check, check. Manage your risk, manage your downside, check your numbers. Okay, so what's the average fuel efficiency of a car from here to here? Well, if you do this and you divide by that, you get 16.43. So the nearest answer is this one here, 16.4, when you round it up to 1 decimal place. Here's another question based on the same data. For car D, the average fuel consumed was least in which year? Is there a trap here? Well, actually there is, because the trap is you thinking I've got to figure out what the fuel was over each year. So you've got the efficiency, like fuel per 1,000 kilometers. So you've got the efficiency in kilometers. Then you say, well, what's the average fuel per 1,000 kilometers? What's the least? You're most efficient where it's a kilometer or 1,000 kilometers in 1 year. So you've just very quickly find the least fuel means the most efficient. What's the most efficient one here? It's the first one, 17.5. It's an example of a question where you can confidently answer the question in 3 seconds flat, because you know what the most efficient path to get to the answer is, and you're not making too much work for yourself. And this will give you more time later to deal with the other questions. So ask yourself, am I trying too hard? Is there a fast route here that's reliable and accurate? Now, last section is data analysis. This is where it's a test of your mathematical fitness. Somebody says, well, what's your physical fitness? You say, oh, how far can I run without having to stop? In this case, it's how quickly and accurately can I make a mathematical calculation and know I'm right? Until you do this kind of practice, you don't develop that sense of accuracy and certainty. So data analysis is there as a test to see if you are both accurate and sure of your answer. So there's not a lot of tricks in this. It's more teaching you through a lot of drills to go through common mathematical processes to get an answer. So you can follow a conversation, do the mathematics in your head, and be able to contribute dynamically as you go along. So here's a nice easy one. If it costs C dollars to construct a road of A kilometers, how many dollars does it cost to construct a similar road of B kilometers? Now this is here because if you get it upside down, it'll give you the wrong answer, okay? So what do we mean by this? C dollars for A kilometers? Well, I'll try and reduce it to 1 unit because I'm trying to get the total cost for B. So I get it for 1 kilometer. So C for A means divided by A for 1 kilometer. I've got a total of B kilometers, so I multiply B by that fraction. So it's B multiplied by C over A. Oh, look, that's C right here. Okay, so that's my answer. The answer is C. Here's another one. Okay, it's a little tricky, but this tests your ability to know what to do with a bunch of numbers. Here's somebody called Ashley. And Ashley had an amount of money, but you don't know what it is. Okay, not yet. You just know it's more than $1,000. And if she divided it among 7 children, she'd have money left over. $6. If she divided among 6 children, she'd be left with 5. If she divided it among 5 children, she'd be left with 4. What's the smallest amount of money that she could have? Now, this looks like it's a huge amount of work right away. But I can tell you, I'm smart and I know that anything that's divisible by 5 is either 5 or 0. Whereas like 6 and 7 could be a bunch of numbers, right? So I would take away 4 from all of these, and I see, okay, everything ends in 5. Okay, so it could be all of them are divisible by 5. So at least all of these are candidates for the last one. If I take away 4 from $5 from each of these, I'm left with a 4. Is that always divisible by 6? I'm not sure. If I take away 6, it's left in a 3. It's left with a 3. Are they always divisible by 7? So what we do is we discover that only option D will allow division among sorry, shouldn't say 8. It should, yeah, sorry, 7. It should say 8. It should only allow division with 6 left over. And once we do that, we can ignore the rest. Okay, so try this one yourself at home. It looks complicated when you look at it at the start, but what you're looking for is a pattern. And sometimes pattern recognition is as powerful as computational ability. Okay, I'll now ask our host Stephanie to step in and see if she's got any questions for us to answer.
Thank you so much, Michael. Yes, I actually do only have one question, unless, of course, all of you that are still here have more questions. But the question was, do we need to calculate in our head, or can we use a calculator in the business admission test?
You can use a calculator. I mean, the reason is because in real life, you have a calculator. I think it is unfortunate that some tests don't give you that opportunity, because when you're in business, nobody will reject the opportunity to have a calculator. So yes, you can have a handheld calculator, or if your phone's got one. Some people use Excel, but the best one is a handheld calculator. It's fastest and most reliable.
I appreciate everyone joining us today. Thank you so much for your attendance and for your patience, and I hope that you learned a lot. If you do come up with questions while you're practicing, reach out to me, reach out to Michael. We'll get your questions answered.
I hope also that the practice for the test becomes enjoyable. And what do I mean by that is, look, I've done tests myself, and prior to creating this test, I had a business where we helped people with tests. And I realized there's a lot of benefit in practicing for tests because it does build skills. And I want you to feel that this test is actually part of your preparation for school and part of your preparation for life afterwards. It's like going to a fitness trainer, except you're in charge. And so these questions are the challenges that awaken that part of your brain, that give you those powers of calculation, of cognition, of understanding. And the more you practice, the better you get. And I think you will feel very powerful and very enthusiastic when you finally get all the answers right. You realize that you're really capable of so much.
Wonderful.
I've seen a question there about Excel.
Exactly. Well, the question is, what software can we use in the test? For example, Excel.
Yeah. ...
Now,
yeah. Now, Excel is permitted, but I would say not recommended. I don't think it's necessarily very convenient compared to a calculator, but it's okay. If you use it and you're very good at it, please use it. All I will say is when you're using it and you switch to Excel, you will get a warning, because every time you move away from the application, it'll say, you know, we don't like you using other applications, but we're checking which ones you're using. If it turns out to be just Excel, then that's fine.
awesome.
I can't think of any other ones you might want to use, unless if you're more familiar with making notes on a computer whiteboard, that's okay too. But I would say the fundamental tools of pencil and paper, handheld calculator, the classic ones are still very good.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. I also wanted to let everyone know that I did record the session today. We will be cutting it because it's very, very long. So we'll make sure that we have only the important parts in it. So please bear with us. As soon as I have it, I will email it to everyone that attended the meeting or the webinar today. So thank you very much for attending. And as I said, please feel free to reach out to all of us.